But of course, it has been the story of the week. The absolute callous and cocky and arrogant interview by Shamima Begum, the Bethnal Green teenager who fled this country at the age of 15 to join ISIS fighters, who now wants to return home given she is pregnant in a refugee camp in Syria and ISIS is close to being defeated. Now, there has been such a massive response to the story. In fact, we do have a Facebook poll on this running over whether Shamima should be allowed back in the country. I'll bring you the results on that very shortly, but you can head to the Talk Radio Twitter poll to vote. But I'd love to know whether you think British ISIS defectors should be banned from returning to the country for good. Jacob Rees-Mogg last night on Question Time was saying, in fact, because of international law, whether we like it or not, Shamima has to be allowed to come into the country. But The Sun today, where I'm executive editor, saying, in fact, no, we shouldn't let her back in. She qualifies for Bangladeshi citizenship. She's eligible to go there so she can try her luck in Bangladesh, but there's absolutely nothing we should do to let her back into the country. This issue as well has raised a bigger debate about multiculturalism in this country and whether there's anything that we can do to try and stop teenagers like this being radicalised. And I was very taken by Brendan O'Neill, who is the editor of Spiked Internet magazine, who wrote this morning saying that this case speaks to what happens when people are brought up in a society as segmented and morally fragmented as Britain is. Life under multiculturalism, he says. Brendan goes on to say, modern Britain refuses to state clearly what its values are and celebrates all value systems being fine, none superior to others. As a consequence, Britain has become split into various often conflicting communities and value systems. Many brought up in this climate come to feel dislocated from any idea of Britishness and from the British nation itself. Then he goes on to say, if you criticise this process, you're an Islamophobe, which divides communities, then clamps down on open and frank discussion. Well, I think we should have the frank discussion here. I live very close to Bethnal Green. I know there is a lot of poverty in that area in East London, but do I for a second think Shamima didn't know what she was doing when she fled to Turkey in 2015 to fight for ISIS? No. At that moment, she became an enemy of this country. And the fact that she wants to come back here to give birth to her third child when the other two died, one from malnutrition, actually, I think, shows callous arrogance. There would need to be serious remorse and serious punishment for Shamima to be helped to get back into the UK, in my opinion. But I'd love to know what you think about this. Should British ISIS defectors like Shamima be banned from returning to the country for good? 0344 499 1000 is my number. I know politicians talking about introducing a 10-year prison sentence for people that go and fight for enemies of the UK, terrorist enemies. I'm sorry, 10 years? That's not enough. That is not enough. If someone wants to come back into this country having gone and fought for ISIS, I think we should lock them up and throw away the key. But it's an interesting debate, isn't it? 0344 499 1000 is my number. But I'm joined now by Khalil Yusuf, who is the spokesman for the Amida Muslim community. Khalil, thank you so much for joining us here on Talk Radio this afternoon. You are in the minority here, Khalil, because you think Shamima should be allowed to return to the UK for the sake of her unborn child. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think that it's a really complex issue, and I don't think that a view that we would take in relation to Shamima Begum is necessarily a view that you would translate in relation to all ISIS fighters. But I think you hit the nail on the head, Dan, when you refer to the unborn child, because the fact is that the ideology that Shamima Begum and some others subscribe to is entirely abhorrent, it's entirely evil. It has no place in any modern society, whether that's in this country or anywhere else. But what we're also talking about is the fate of an unborn child and the question of whether that child should be punished in the same way that its mother should be punished, particularly given that two of its siblings had died from in fairly unpleasant circumstances, as you rightly described. So my own view is that Shamima Begum should be brought to this country and she should be investigated and she should be punished. We are fortunate that in this country, very recently, we've had the Crime Overseas Production Orders Bill, which has been given royal assent, which is going to make it much, much easier to prosecute people who have gone overseas to fight. And so if she is brought back, she should absolutely be investigated and she should be prosecuted. And if it is found at some point that she has been rehabilitated and released into society, even then, it would be my view that she should, in those circumstances, be subject to careful monitoring and strict restrictions.
But how could we ever trust Shamima Begum? She would be a hero amongst potential extremists in this country. I'm sorry, I would never trust this woman to be on the streets of Bethnal Green again, knowing how many extremists operate in those parts of East London, trying to get vulnerable youth to do exactly what she did. And then she's walking around a free woman. What type of message does that send?
Well, I mean, that's a very important point that you raise, and that is where our criminal justice system, the parole board, and all of those that address how we deal with our prisoners and what happens if and when they are released has to be considered. So I think that it wouldn't be my view that somebody should be released prematurely. They should only be released from prison if and when they are able to contribute positively to society, if they have been suitably punished, and if they have been rehabilitated. Rehabilitation is a central feature of our criminal justice system, and we as a society have moved on. We don't have capital punishment in this country, and even the most evil people in this country are dealt with according to our justice system. And so I think that Shamima Begum, like others, should be dealt with if she's committed a crime, and she should certainly be prosecuted and punished.
But you want us, presumably, to spend money to put British lives at risk in order to get her out of this refugee camp in Syria. That's essentially what you're calling for.
Well, not at all, because we wouldn't be putting any British lives at risk, because if she were to come to this country, she would come to this country securely. The security services should take full responsibility of that. She would no doubt be incarcerated without bail. She would then go on trial, and our judges and our juries would decide whether she committed a crime. And if she had committed a crime, then she would be imprisoned. And so there would be no opportunity for her during that period to be exposed to the country or to the public, and so the public would not be, subject to, hopefully any negative activity that she would engage in or she might encourage. But what we're talking about here is about the unborn child. We're not talking about Shamima Begum, because in other circumstances you might say that there are people who don't deserve to come to this country. But because she has an unborn child, I think that she should be dealt with differently than you would potentially somebody else.
The thing is, Carlo, this is obviously a brutal subject. It is a brutal subject in so many ways. And I do obviously feel massive sympathy for this unborn child that is, you could say, half British, although this is a woman who has defected from the UK in the most sickening of ways. However, Shamima Begum allowed 2 children to be brought up in the most horrific circumstances. Both were died. One died of malnutrition. So why should we all of a sudden care about a baby that she now wants to bring up when she allowed 2 of her previous children to die in horrific circumstances?
Because I think, Dan, that that's what makes us as a country different to those barbarians in other countries. It is that we have a legal system. It's that we have a democracy. It's that we recognize concepts of freedom. It's that we actually treat our prisoners, even the most evil ones, in ways that are much better than, as I've said, those barbarians in
But she chose to leave us, though. And this is a woman who I believe is a barbarian, because in this interview where she showed no remorse, one of the things she said was, when I saw my first severed head, it didn't faze me at all. This is a barbarian.
And I agree with you, Dan. I mean, that is true. But
should she have the child taken away from her, Khalil?
Well, I don't think that she would be. I don't know how it would work within a prison environment, but I would probably think that she isn't suitable to keep that child in prison.
But she'd be out after just a few years.
Well, that is something that the courts will decide, but we have to give the courts a chance to do that. And I think that we don't judge the child in the same way that you judge Shamima Begum, and that's the distinction. I want to reiterate that point, that what we're talking about here is about how we deal with an unborn child that has a connection to this country, and how we as a society would view that child, how we as a society would deal with the future of that child. That's the thing that we're really talking about. I think if Shamima Begum did not have an unborn child, we might perhaps be having a different conversation.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't think it makes any difference. I don't want her back in this country. I think she's dangerous. I think she would become very quickly a martyr. I don't think we can trust her, and I don't want to spend British money or put British lives at risk to get a woman back who says severed heads in bins didn't faze her. This isn't a woman that we need in this country, whether she is pregnant or not.
Yeah, well, look, I totally understand that strength of sentiment. You know, when people leave this country, the environment that we have provided for them, and they go to another country and then they commit these terrible crimes, if indeed that's what she has committed, then obviously they should be subject to punishment. And we do all feel very aggrieved by that. I mean, I as a Muslim feel very concerned because she goes out and she fights for so-called Islamic State and gives my religion, which is a religion of peace, a bad name. She doesn't do anything in my religion, so it hurts me as it does other Muslims as well. But what we really need to do is to make sure that it may be that the security service doesn't get valuable intelligence from her. There may be all sorts of very good reasons why she could be brought back to this country and it can be used in a positive way. But ultimately, we are a country of rules. We're a country of laws. We are a country that doesn't do things in the way that other barbarian regimes do. And by bringing her back and by subjecting her to our courts in whom we have trust, to our juries, to our judicial system, and by treating an unborn child compassionately, I think we can only do ourselves favours. She's not going to be a martyr because I'm sure she'll be on suicide watch, and she's not probably going to be released very soon if she's convicted of these crimes. And the fact that we now have a crime overseas production orders bill, which has been given royal assent, is going to mean that our courts are going to be in a much, much stronger position to prosecute and to prosecute decisively.
Well, I absolutely appreciate your point of view. That is Khalil Youssef. He is a spokesman for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Although I have to say, the vast, vast majority of you disagreeing, massive, overwhelming majority in our poll on Facebook about whether Shamima Begum should be allowed back into this country. We've had 82,200 votes, 99% of you saying she shouldn't be let back in, 1% of people saying that she should. Kate on the text message here saying if she goes to prison here, it will still be better than a refugee camp, which is what she wants. Kate, I couldn't agree more. What do you think? My number is 0344 499 1000. Here's the thing. If she was going to come back and be in prison for 10, 15, 20 years, but honestly, the laws in this country are so weak when it comes to terrorist offences, she would be out in a couple of years, back on the streets of Bethnal Green, back being a mother to her child. I do not think we need someone like that in this country. 0344 499 1000 is my number. Should British ISIS defectors be banned from returning to the country? That's the question.